right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bob's Lunch Break. I am Bob the Orc, and today we are going to hang out and. Oh, whoops, that's my dad calling. I'm sorry, Dad. I just started the stream and I forgot to mute the phone. I will call you back a little bit later. Anyway, we're going to be hanging out today. We're going to talk about a couple things in the news, and Trump deport because you can't talk about the news without Trump right now. You got deportations, disaster relief, and maybe some other things. So here I am. I'm Bob the Orc. I just got back in from grabbing a Brahms burger, and I got my cup of tea. So the first thing I want to do is, we'll just talk a brief moment about all the Trump stuff going on. And I know that my MAGA friends are super happy, and I'm sure my Democrat friends are not super happy. And, look, that's just what it is. It's like the inverse of what happened under Biden. Trump's going to do Trump things. He's going to do a bunch of stuff that people aren't going to like. He's going to be keeping a bunch of political promises that he made, because politicians, tend to do that. I mean, I guess technically Trump doesn't have to because he's not up for re-election, but if he wants to have a legacy, if he wants to get, J.D. Vance in next time, or if he wants to have coattails to get people in on the midterms, he's going to have to keep his promises. And so he's going to do Trump things, and that should not be a surprise to anyone. And some of the stuff's going to be good, and some of it's going to be bad, and some of it's going to be and that's just what we're going to be in for. So I just want to let you guys know that yes, we are going to be in for a roller coaster ride. This should not be a surprise to anyone. Let's talk a little bit about the deportations going on, and there's probably 20 plus million illegals here in America. That'd be my guess. Probably 20, 25 million, something like that. They've been saying 10 million illegals for most of my lifetime, so obviously the number's much higher than that. And I don't think Trump's actually going to deport 25 million people. I think that you're going to see a big push early on to grab all the low-hanging fruit. Gangbangers and recent arrivals and people that aren't going to cause a lot of trouble if we toss them out of the country. And that's largely going to just sort of draw a line in the sand, make a statement to the rest of the world saying, hey, don't come here illegally. We're not putting up with this shit anymore. And I think that Trump has to make a big show of things right now. He's got some Air Force cargo planes that are going to go help take people back to their home countries. And, I don't think you're going to be seeing... There's not going to be like the army going house to house. That's stupid. Now, you are going to have some ICE raids in some of the big cities, and these are probably going to focus on the more criminal, the bigger criminal elements and problems like that. But I think you're going to see a lot of noise early on just for show, because the real problem is not getting the illegals out that are already here. The real problem is stopping the waves of people swarming into the country. And so I think that strategically speaking, putting a big show of force right now, and then putting pressure on Mexico and Canada to help us out on their end, secure the border. Because I mean, look, we're probably not actually taking Canada as the 51st state. That'd be kind of a train wreck. And Mexico is America's biggest trading partner. We're going to probably scare them a little bit. I'm sure they need us more than we need them. But there's no reason why we can't go back to the Remain in Mexico policy and have the Mexican government help deal with stuff. Now, declaring the drug cartels to be international terrorists, I mean, that's a big balls move there. I mean, those guys are pretty bad dudes, and that gives a lot of... That'll give a lot of options to just go and blast them, drone strike them, shit like that. Apparently, the military being deployed to the border, they're armed, they have permission to shoot back at drug cartel members if they're fired upon. So, I don't think he's playing around. I think that we are going to secure the border. Now, as far as what to do with all the people already here, well, I think it depends. Broadly speaking, you can divide the people here, both the illegals and the people here legally for that matter, into two categories of people: people who contribute to society and people who are just draining our resources and causing problems. And I think that broadly speaking, there's a lot of support to get rid of the people who are causing problems and keep the people who are beneficial to our society. And I think that over time you're going to see that probably emerge. But Trump's going to talk tough early on because he has to, and he wants his victories. He's a showman. He tends to talk a lot of bullshit, and then kind of meet in the middle later on. We've seen this before the first go round. I think it's not going to be that much different from before, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Now, one thing to consider about immigration that a lot of people don't think about that much. They'll say like, "Oh, immigration's great." Well, it is, but how much, right? And one thing that you have to consider is that America in particular is a strange country where we're more of an idea than a people. What makes you an American is that you believe in the ideas, the founding ideas of America: the Constitution, limited government, self reliance, not paying taxes, doing what you want to do. Um, we don't like to be governed by other people, but we do have a broad moral framework based around Judeo-Christian values of the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment era. We have a lot of that John Locke stuff going on here, where we're generally libertarian leaning, where we don't want a lot of government, we want to be left alone, and this is sort of a core idea. And Americans get very rowdy very quickly when you start taking away our declared freedoms, our right to say what we want, the right to do what we want, the right to defend ourselves. Americans don't like asking for permission, which makes it very nice here at home and makes us kind of a pain in the ass around the world. And I think the world largely puts up with us because we're rich and we have aircraft carriers. So, but when in any society, especially when you don't have a core racial demographic, like in Greece, where half my family's from, they're Greek. They are genetically and ethnically Greek, and you have that racial component, that ancestral component that makes you Greek with a multi-thousand year history, right? If you're Egyptian, or if you're Chinese, or even if you're British, although the British are getting cucked right now, if you're French, if you're from any of the African tribes that have been, in their region, in Ethiopia especially. Holy crap, Ethiopia's been there forever, right? Um, you have places that have a genetic ancestral component that America doesn't really have. I mean, we kind of do. We've been here for, a few hundred years, but, compared to the natives who've been here for tens of thousands of years, not, we're relatively recent arrivals, right? And so what binds us together is an idea. So just like in Sweden, where they have problems when they bring in lots of people from incompatible cultures, and then they have trouble, where they get a little bit stabby in London sometimes. In America, we're more prone to have problems if we bring in too many people too quickly. But on the other hand, because we don't have a genetic component to what makes you an American, we're also able to assimilate people faster, because all you have to do to be an American is believe in the idea. We have it all written down: Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Federalist Papers. I know that most of our politicians are illiterate and never read that stuff, but I mean that's y'all's fault for keep electing morons. So, hey Shadow Wolf, thanks for joining me. Come hang out. So, America has the means, any country has the means to assimilate people at a certain rate, and depending on the strength of the culture, you can assimilate people at a faster or slower rate. America has the means to assimilate people probably faster than most countries, but there's still a limit. And so if you bring in one person into a neighborhood full of Americans, that person will very quickly assimilate and become an American because they don't want to get ostracized. That's just, naturally how things work. It doesn't matter what race they are, what culture they are. One person will get assimilated very quickly. Now, some cultures have stronger internal beliefs than others, shall we say? They're very distinct, and you've seen this in certain communities that have formed kind of enclaves where you brought in a lot of them, but not so much that they don't assimilate, but they still have a very strong, enclave mentality. But if you bring in too many people at once, if you were to bring in 1 billion Chinese people into America all at once, or 1 billion Indians, the American population would be outnumbered, and we would essentially become Chinese or become Indian in culture. That'd become the dominant culture. And obviously that's ridiculous. We'd never bring in 1 billion people. But, right now we have a population of about 300, 350 million people, and probably about 50 million Americans were not born in America and they came from other cultures, right? And that's a little bit of a strain, but I think we can handle that. America has a very enticing, pervasive culture. That's why we're able to win the Cold War through our culture, not through our military might. And our politicians should try to remember that next time whenever we try to, intimidate foreign countries. It's actually our free culture that that entices people to become our friends, rather than our military might that tries to force people into submission, because nobody likes to be forced into submission. But, if you bring in a large group of people and you put them in the same location, like, all the Somalis, forming enclaves in one area, they don't tend to assimilate very well. They have no reason to learn the language, learn the culture, and they have a very resilient culture that does not want to be absorbed into America, for example, right? Look at the various Chinatowns in different cities in America. It usually takes several generations for people to assimilate out of that culture and into ours. And, I'm not trying to get into the idea of like one culture is better than the other. It's just as a practical matter, in America, American culture is the dominant culture that we've, bled and fought over for hundreds of years. And while we're a relatively young nation, we've earned our right to have our own culture, just like, the Chinese have bled and fought for thousands of years to have their culture. The Russians have bled and fought for 1,000 years to have theirs. The Brits have bled and fought for, 1,000 years to have their culture, only to give it away. The French and whatnot. And so if you look at different parts of Europe where they're bringing in lots and lots of people, when I was in London in 2016, and I didn't see a lot of British there. I saw a lot of Romanians. They're all wearing Yankees hats. They're very cool people. And I saw a lot of Muslims, mainly from, Pakistan or Afghanistan, somewhere in that. I saw so many people wearing the full body, burqas and hijabs and whatnot. And I even ran into a foreign gentleman who wanted to get a little bit stabby with me. And once he found out I was an American, he thought I was armed, and so he fucked off. But they brought in too many people too quickly, and they did not do a good job absorbing them and assimilating them into their culture. Um, because the reality is, people don't want to change that much. And so if you're going to bring people into your country, why are they there? Are they there because they idealize your country, they want to be part of your country, and they want to become British, become French, become American, become Chinese, become whoever, right? Or are they just there because they want the money and their life sucks in their current country and they're just sort of making do? So, the rate at which you bring people in is very important. It's probably more important than anything else. Now, where you bring people in from, if we were to bring a Canadian into America, the Canadian would absorb, would assimilate very quickly, because Canada's basically the Diet Coke of America, right? I mean, they're basically the same thing as American, only a little bit nicer and, and and they have some weird politics, but they're basically just nicer Americans, right? They'll be fine here. If you bring in a Mexican into America, we have such a long shared history. They're going to assimilate very quickly. They're generally a Christian country. Most of the people there are pretty conservative Christians, Catholics. They're very hardworking. They share a lot of our ideals. They kicked out the Spanish, much like we kicked out the Brits. We've fought with each other in the past over places like Texas and whatnot. And so they will assimilate relatively quickly. The further away from America and the more foreign you get, the longer it's going to take to assimilate. And this is why having a legal immigration process is important, and why just having millions of people running across the border causes a lot of trouble. And a lot of Americans don't want to put up with that shit. Now, that being said, the legal process to get here. Yeah, see, Shadow Wolf's mom came legally from Canada, and I bet she turned into a very nice and kind American who was probably already nicer than most of the Americans who lived here. Um, so, the legal immigration process, depending on where you're from, is a pain in the ass. I've got a number of friends from Europe who are trying to come here, and it is a multi-year pain in the ass process. So, of course, people are going to just run across the border. But there's a lot of problems that happens there too. And the bottom line is that we're going to have to get control over our border situation. And I think that the Trump strategy is going to be to come down hard like a sledgehammer and kind of scare people into falling in line. And then once the waves of people coming across have stopped, then things will maybe start chilling out. We can start figuring out what to do with the people who are here. But, obviously anybody here in America who's causing trouble is going to get tossed. I mean, hell, even if you're here legally, if you cause trouble, if you commit a crime while you're here legally, you could have your visa revoked, you could be tossed out. Um, so that's kind of the first thing I want to talk about. Now, regarding disaster relief, I was listening to the radio today while I was picking up my burger, and apparently Trump's down in North Carolina dealing with all that. And the North Carolina situation was a mess. Appalachia is a very rugged terrain. I know their mountains aren't quite as cool as the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are awesome and big. Mm. But, it's still rough terrain, and the government dropped the ball on fixing up the place and getting it dealt with, which is kind of par for the course. The federal government sucks at most things that it does. Um, and there was some comment that was made in an interview that when Trump does disaster relief for California, he's going to put some restrictions. And I mean, y'all kind of fucked up in California anyway. You didn't have enough water to deal with your fires. It happens every year. I mean, every year I call up my buddy in California and I tease him about his state being on fire. So, like, California being on fire is not a surprise. They light themselves on fire every fucking year. And I'm sure it's a lot of people pulling funny business as well as just accidents. Whenever you have, there was a report that came out that meth heads like to light shit on fire. So don't do meth, and don't keep meth heads around because they'll light your shit on fire, apparently. But, I think that California is such an inefficient state that there should be some sort of strings attached to how the money goes to help them out. And yeah, we ought to help California rebuild. I mean, personally, I don't know why you'd live in California. I mean, the weather's nice, but the government sucks. Um, and so I think you're going to see different experiences in California versus North Carolina. North Carolina is much more difficult terrain to get relief supplies in and get stuff rebuilt. Apparently, there's a bunch of Amish down there helping rebuild homes because they're used to building stuff without all the modern technology, and Amish are fantastic builders. Um, Realistically, you are your first responder. I live in Oklahoma where we have tornadoes, and so I built my house, I reinforced my house with hurricane ties to make it stronger against tornadoes, and we get a lot of ice storms and power outages and stuff, so I've got, you know, extra food supplies, non-perishables. We don't like looters in Oklahoma, so everybody in the neighborhood, we have a lot of deterrence. We have a lot of Second Amendment deterrence to prevent people from looting should there ever be a national disaster. Yeah, Texas is. Yeah, you're right, Shadow. Texas is kind of the same thing. They get a lot of tornadoes and stuff down in Texas, and you know, you guys have to be prepared because the government's good at doing the really big stuff, right? The government's good at bringing in lots of relief supplies and bringing in heavy equipment to haul off debris and like the really, really big stuff. But the government's not going to help you with your looters. They're not going to help you when your insurance company screws you over. They might eventually, but by the time they help you, it's going to be too late. So if you live in a fire-prone area, make sure you don't have overhanging trees that are going to burn your house down. Make sure that you've got some sort of masonry house. There are ways to build houses that are fire resistant, just like there are ways to build the houses that are more earthquake resistant or storm resistant. That we do here in Oklahoma to make them more storm resistant, right? So you've got to make sure that you're prepared because at least for a month, you need at least a month's worth of being on your own. Just because when something bad happens, FEMA's got a lot of money that they love spending on a bunch of stuff that doesn't ever help people because they're a big government organization that's not very efficient. Eventually they get the job done, but it takes some time, right? So you're going to be on your own for at least a couple weeks, probably a month. Look, the people in North Carolina have been largely on their own for a couple of months. And local communities are good at organizing and helping out. State agencies are. Hey, other guy. Michigan, you have to worry about winter storms, yeah, and blackouts. Yeah, so you're going to have different disaster threats depending on where you're at. And you've got to prepare accordingly. And there's lots of survival YouTube channels out there that talk about all that stuff. The big thing is, have at least a month's worth of supplies for yourself and for other people. Because there's going to be people who need help. Hey, Luxury, how's it going? And personally, I believe you should have at least enough ammunition for 2 good riots. At least 2 good riots, because you never know. And make sure you have buddies. Like I'm friends with all my neighbors, and if we ever have a massive blackout or a massive storm, we've all got supplies. We're all armed, allegedly. I'm not. Obviously, I lost all of my guns and ammunition in a tragic boating accident, but my neighbors have enough guns that I can borrow something. And we have the means to defend the neighborhood from looters because the police are going to be overwhelmed. The federal government's going to be very slow to get into action. Look at the mess in Hurricane Katrina. I know it's a long time ago for a lot of people, but that was a shit show. And the reality is that a lot of people aren't going to want to evacuate the houses. They're going to want to protect their own property because, like we saw in Los Angeles, looters started, setting additional fires to get people to evacuate so they could go rob people's houses, little motherfuckers. So, make sure you have the means to defend yourself for at least a month or two, I think. And by that time, usually the government gets around. Now, look, if you want to be a prepper and prepare for the whole zombie apocalypse thing, man, I'm coming to your house when the shit hits the fan, right? But the reality is that if we have the zombie apocalypse, if we have World War III, we're gonna have bigger problems to deal with. So for most people, just make sure you're prepared for a couple months. And we saw this during the toilet paper apocalypse during COVID. Make sure you've got at least a month or two worth of supplies. And it doesn't take that much to do it. So, like, every time you go grocery shopping, buy an extra can of something, right? And the canned goods are going to last for a few years. And over time, let's say you go grocery shopping once a week, over the course of a year of buying an extra can of something, well, there's 52 cans of something. There's a month's worth of preserved food right there. Yeah. You're right, luxury. Yeah, looters like attacking relief convoys. Hey, JP, thanks for hanging out. So, you know, those are kind of the big things I wanted to talk about. That you need to be your own first responder, and then getting back to the Trump stuff. Trump's going to do Trumpy things. We all know he's going to do that, and whatever he does is going to be big and bold and glorious and loud, and it's going to make a big noise of things. But mostly, he's just going to do the shit he said he was going to do. That's what it looks like, at least. And we all knew it was going to happen. I'm actually a little bit surprised that he's keeping his promises as much as he is. And look, for those of you who voted for him, good job. You got what you wanted, right? And for those of you who didn't vote for him, better luck next time. I mean, this is what happens. Um, anyway, so this is most of what I had to say for you gotta live country to survive. That is true. Yeah. Now I wouldn't know what to do if I shot a deer. I mean, I'd need somebody to help me process it, and my brother lives too far away. I'm not. Yeah, the AI thing, man. Everybody's jumping on the AI train. I think a lot of it's a money grab for people. And look, Trump's a boomer. He's an old dude. He doesn't know about technology that much, and he's just buying into whatever people are telling him. It's the same thing that happened, during COVID. And while I would like to hope that, theoretically, AI analyzing cancers and using the mRNA technology to develop specialized cures, while that is theoretically possible, I think we're a ways away from that, and people are going to be very skeptical about any of the mRNA stuff, just because it didn't work out quite so well with the jabby jab. A lot of people uh, were not satisfied. We'll just put it that way. I don't want to get in trouble on YouTube, but a lot of people were not satisfied with how the jabby jab went. So, now, yeah, oh, yeah. You're just watching Terminators enough to reason to not trust AI. Now, I will say this about cancer stuff. There is a lot of compelling research that shows that cancer cells, because of their higher metabolism, tend to burn sugars faster than normal healthy cells do. And so, low carb or zero carb diets, carnivore type diets, keto type diets, do seem to have over time a beneficial effect getting rid of cancers, or at least reducing them. Yeah, rewriting your DNA is scary as shit. So I'm not going to. On the advice of my doctor, I'm not going to have people fuck with my DNA, because I've got enough problems as it is. I don't need any more. I do think that people need to eat healthy. I struggle with that a little bit. I drink way too much tea to keep going. I put too much honey in my tea, but it helps with my allergies, so. Oh, excuse me, one moment. I'm sorry. But, I think that people need to take good care of themselves. And, by the way, if you see me looking over this way, it's because I've got the big chat screen over there. That's where I read what people are writing. And yeah. If you starve the cancer of sugars, the cancer doesn't do so well. At least that's what a lot of research seems to be leaning in. And um, well, can AI do a worse job at running things than humans? Yes, I think it can. And the reason is that AI is programmed by humans. We don't really have a real AI. These are all algorithms and pattern recognition engines, and nobody's going to ever let an AI say, uh, just be completely uninhibited. I mean, look at the Google Gemini bullshit when they tried doing AI, and it made everybody a DEI hire. There were, you asked Google Gemini to draw a picture of a Nazi, and it'd draw a black lesbian woman Nazi, in a Nazi uniform, just because they were trying to be diverse. Draw the founding fathers, and it'd have, very diverse founding fathers. And somebody obviously interjected in their personal ideology into that, and it made a mess. And well, I mean, didn't Cortana eventually become the bad guy later on in Halo? I've never played Halo, but I've watched YouTube playthroughs. When I've just been working. A lot of times I'll work on stuff and I'll just watch gaming videos. And doesn't Cortana start out cool and then eventually become like bad and wants to murder everybody or something? So I don't know if it's because Cortana's an AI or because you can't trust a woman with unlimited power. I couldn't resist that one. But I don't think Cortana worked out quite so well in the end. But this just comes down to you need personal responsibility. You need to take care of your. Yeah, we don't want a Skynet situation. I mean, AI is fun to play with. I made my my cool little orc. I mean, the women came out a little bit weird, but I used Midjourney to make that, and it looked. I wanted an orc drinking a cup of tea with women and guns and money and an American flag, and it did okay. But oh yeah, I'm a bad orc. Um, my girlfriend gives me permission to say bad things, so that's that's my excuse. I'm sticking to it. But in return, she says that I have to fight off any bears because that's my job as a man. So I have to fight bears and die for her because civilizationally that's how we've survived. Yeah, no, I think AI has a really long way to go. Right now, it's really just a pattern recognition set of pattern recognition algorithms, and it's going to be. I think it's going to come faster than you think, and AI is going to replace a lot of stuff. But AI generated stuff is still pretty obviously AI, and it's like I'm helping my dad redo his opera plots book, and we're looking at doing a graphic with each of the operas, La Traviata and La Boheme and The Flying Dutchman and Fledermaus and all that stuff. And I could probably have AI make an AI image, but that's not going to look as cool as just having a hand drawn by a human, because people can kind of tell the difference when something's made by a human. AI is still a little bit weird. And while it looks cool and it makes some nice things, it's just compiling approximations based on all of the data it's been trained with. So, but I also think that as a person, you need to find your niche and find something that AI can't replace. Let's see. AI is the biggest sort of. Yeah, I would agree. AI. Well, even Elon's talked about that as well. I mean, AI is going to be like the next nuclear weapons. It's one of those things where we have to develop it ourselves because if we don't, then our enemies are going to have it. But it's also the one thing that could enslave humanity, completely cuck humanity, or you know, get us to wipe ourselves out. Let's see, something I find funny about the community I live near by is that they didn't let big corpos build their stores and restaurants in towns. It's just a McDonald's sitting on the edge of it. New York City. When I was growing up, New York City did that too. We didn't let the big corporations come in, not at first, and then over time, they started creeping their way in more and more. But it used to be a bunch of locally owned businesses. There's a movie. It was a Meg Ryan movie. What the fuck was the name of that? Let's go pull up IMDb real quick. And actually, let's Google Meg Ryan. It was You've Got Mail. That's what it was. It's sort of a stupid rom-com, but the premise of the movie was you had this local bookstore that eventually got pushed out by a big company, and it's actually based on a true story. There used to be a children's bookstore in the Upper West Side where I grew up called Eeyore's, and it was an awesome bookstore. I used to love books when I was a kid. I mean, I still love books, but I don't like children's books so much anymore. And so Eeyore's was a nice small family-owned bookstore, and eventually they got squeezed out when the Barnes and Noble came in. And the big corporations can be very predatory. Uh, what I've done with my business. I've kept my computer business, Norman Computers, alive for 25 years. Can't believe it's been that long. And we've managed to survive against the big corporations because we do things that the big corporations can't. We're more skilled, we have better hand holding and customer service, that personal touch, and so we focus on the interpersonal relationship. And so when you're competing against big corporation or when you're competing against AI, you've got to focus on what can you do as an individual that they can't do. Let's see here. It's a choice. Human consciousness. No, you're exactly right, Luxury. And, I'm personally on Team Human. I know I'm a bigot, but, I like my fleshy bag of mostly water. And while I think AI can be a useful tool, I'm definitely firmly on Team Human. Uh, you're going to see a lot of stuff being automated away. For example, I know that a friend of mine used AI to help write a book, and I know there's a lot of people who use AI to create content. You've got all this stuff on YouTube now where it's got the AI voice talking about this thing and that thing, and it's gotten better, but you can kind of tell it's an AI voice. And I think that how you compete is you just have to find something that you can do that AI can't, like that personal interaction. Um, Thank you, JP. It's a little bit unintentional, but you know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I have all that stuff just kind of merged into my brain. So find ways that you can compete that the AI can't, and you are going to have to learn how to use the different tools and whatnot. Um, the the big thing, like AI can calculate numbers, it's just an algorithm. But what makes humans amazing is because we'll decide that we want to do something. For example, the first guy to climb Mount Everest, climbing Mount Everest was a fucking stupid idea. There's nothing up there. It's tall, it's cold, it's dangerous. There's no good reason to climb Mount Everest. But I'm sure the first guy's like, look, it's a big mountain. I'm going to climb on top of that because I'm a human and that's what we do. We climb shit. And so we did it, right? And so humans do things just because we want to. And that makes us awesome because we'll do crazy shit just because we want to do it. And I think we need to embrace that aspect of human nature. Um yeah, so other guy says he grew up post 9/11. I cannot begin to describe how much the world changed after 9/11. There's two, I would say, monumental events of my life that I saw the world change more than anything else. The first was when the Berlin Wall came down. Most people, most younger people don't understand just how different the world was when we had the threat of communism. And then there's that brief period of time post Berlin Wall, pre 9/11, from about 1991 to 2000, where America was awesome. And that is the time that I really remember most fondly. America was awesome. The late 90s was the most amazing time to be alive. And then 9/11 happened, and then all this bullshit started happening under the name of freedom and security and all that stuff. And the Patriot Act was anything but patriotic. Most of these laws do exactly the opposite of what they say. Patriot Act took away our freedoms and let the government spy on us and all that bullshit. And it would be nice to get back to that golden age of America. And maybe we can do it, but we're going to have to shed a lot of government to make that happen. Because all the government's really doing is stealing our money, using crafted problems as an excuse to steal our money and get their buddies rich. Um, no, China's a totally different threat than the USSR. So the USSR, they were, they were true believers in their communism stuff at first, and then things started to change because it wasn't really working. It very quickly became a dictatorship, or sort of an oligarchy. But there was real threat of world war with the USSR, and they were very worthy adversaries. Imagine an adversary as skilled as Russia, as competent as Russia, only with triple the resources. Okay, so like right now, Russia is a very worthy adversary. Those guys mean business, and they are very competent, and they are willing to sacrifice a lot to get their shit done. People make the mistake of underestimating the resolve that the Russian people have. The USSR was like Russia, but times three and run by communists. And now, eventually, the communism stuff wasn't really working, and everybody kind of knew it. And so it sort of crumbled under its own weight. We did not really defeat the USSR through military action. It was more that they defeated themselves through inefficiency, and our culture and our freedoms and our rock and roll. They couldn't really compete with that. And it's interesting, if you go to Russia now, you hear all like 90s music. Russia now is very 90s Americana. Because the 90s America is the country was the culture that defeated the Soviets. And the modern Russians are not remotely communist. The modern Russians are very capitalistic. Now, the Chinese are very different. The Chinese have always been Chinese. Maybe they painted over a communist veneer, but they were always kind of a Chinese oligarchy, kind of a mercantile civilization. And their threat is economic. So a long time ago, I had a conversation with the ambassador from China, and he was talking about China's 50-year plan. This is back in 1995, I think. I was the top student in David Bourne's political science class, and so we got to, whenever foreign dignitaries would come to town, we would meet, and he'd let the best students go and talk with him. So I was talking economics with the ambassador from China, and he was talking about kind of a 50-year plan of making the world, especially America, economically dependent on China. That way we'd be their military bitch, and they would basically buy us out and influence us using soft power. So the Chinese are a lot more subversive. In the 80s, there's a KGB agent who defected to America. It was like Yuri something or other, Brezhnov. It was some Russian name. And he was talking about the idea of demoralization of American society, where they were basically going to teach a bunch of bullshit to American kids in order to devolve our society so that we would crumble from within. And then when the Soviet Union fell apart, the Chinese took over that strategy. This is why a lot of the Black Lives Matter funding at the larger scale is coming from China. A lot of the LGBTQ plus stuff is coming, a lot of that funding is coming from China. All the, Free Palestine stuff, a lot of that's Chinese. And a lot of the Israel stuff's being funded by Chinese too. Just anything that's divisive that'll cause Americans to fight, the Chinese are indirectly funding a lot of that stuff. And because they don't want us to be independent. Anything that'll make us dependent on big government. And you also have a lot of the Davos people, World Economic Forum, the Soros guys. All those guys are funding that kind of stuff too, because nobody wants independent Americans because we're a pain in the ass. Everybody wants us to be kind of good little Europeans, and Americans are just not Europeans. But no, the Chinese are a lot. I don't want to say they're more committed, but the Chinese are a lot more patient than the Soviets were. And they've got well, they're funding the cartels, but we're funding the cartels too. I mean, a lot of the CIA black budget stuff, where does that come from? I'm sure there's a lot of funny business going on with the cartels and the CIA and stuff like that. I mean, I have no evidence of it, but it just seems logical. So, the Chinese are going to be a big threat. Plus, the Chinese have a very strong culture. They've got a multi-thousand-year culture, whereas the Soviets were relatively new. One of the things that happened with the Soviets was the Russians didn't really like communism that much, but they wanted their Russian Orthodox Church back. Like Vladimir Putin was a hardcore Orthodox Christian, and a lot of these KGB guys were. And when the Soviet Union, people would give the Soviet Union kind of lip service, uh, whereas a lot of the Chinese, they're true believers. I mean, they and the Chinese communism is not pure communism. It's very, they take some of the benefits of capitalism and free market. And, the Chinese government is really kind of an oligarchy like it's always been for thousands of years, with Winnie the Pooh being the emperor. I mean, Xi Jinping. I'm sorry, I can never get the Winnie the Pooh reference out of my head. It's just so funny. He'll probably kill me if I ever go to China, though. I was in Mexico a few years ago, and the Chinese were building roads. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, because what the Chinese are doing, the Chinese are very smart. They'll build infrastructure projects in strategic countries, especially that have resources they need, and then they will uh, basically use that "you owe me," and they'll make the countries kind of beholden to them economically. The Chinese are masters of soft power. Now, keep in mind, the Chinese have never really won an actual war. They're not good at fighting wars. They've always used soft power to get what they want, and they're very good at soft power. Whereas the Soviets were more hard power people. Um, yeah, no, the Chinese are, they'll build a lot of critical infrastructure, and they know how to keep the keys to the castle so that you become dependent on the Chinese. Whereas when the Soviets marched across Europe fighting the fascists, fighting the Nazis, I mean, nobody really liked Nazis. Nobody really liked communists either. But it's kind of well, which one do you want to go with? Well, the Nazis are killing my parents, so we'll side with the communists. Or the communists are killing my family, so we'll side with the Nazis. There wasn't really much of a choice. And then they marched across Europe, losing, 25 million people to go and just steamroll the Germans, steamroll the Nazis. And but that was more of a hard power play. Meanwhile, the Chinese were, I mean, they're having their civil war, but the Chinese were getting their asses kicked by Japan. So the Chinese are much more soft power, in my opinion. At least what I've studied over the years. So anyway, I hope you guys like this format. It's just kind of a chill format. I know a lot of times when I'm playing games, I'm focused on the game. This is actually a lot of the idea behind this was when Everyday Luxury was telling me on stream the other day that he liked just talking about other topics and whatnot. And I thought, well, we'll just do kind of a hangout show, and while I'm drinking my tea and taking my break. So Everyday Luxury, you're a lot of the inspiration behind doing this. And maybe what I'll do is I'll bring people into Discord at some point, and we'll do kind of something on camera with people or something like that. But no, this is kind of a relaxing thing, and gives me a chance to take kind of a break. Russia equals fire. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Although they do, are you talking about in their current war? Or are you talking about, historically in World War II? Or they would call it the Great Patriotic War, I believe. I mean, And America's lit a lot of shit on fire too. We did Dresden. We nuked Japan. Um, Actually, one of the interesting things to think about, Trump pissed off the Russians recently by saying, the Russians helped America win World War II, which, I mean, we all kind of helped each other. And I was thinking about it last night, and the the reality is that Russia could have won World War II on their own, but it would have been very costly. And America could have won World War II on its own, provided Russia didn't let Germany take all the oil they needed in the Caucasus. Um, because frankly, by 1945, we would have just nuked their ass, and so we would have won. We would have each won the war in very different ways, but it would have sucked, and probably a lot more people would have died. Um, Germany was never going to win World War II. They just didn't have the resources for it. The whole reason Germany attacked Russia to begin with was they needed the oil. It's the same problem Japan had. Japan was not going to win World War II. They didn't have the oil and the natural resources to sustain a prolonged war effort. And what makes Russia so formidable is they have. So Russia and America are two very unique countries. We're actually probably the two most similar countries on the planet, which might upset a bunch of Americans and Russians, but it's true. Um, we're both large land area countries that are completely self-sufficient with natural resources, which means we can conduct a prolonged campaign completely independent of all the other countries in the world if we have to. And we have a very self-reliant and determined people. The Russians are probably a little bit more stoic than the Americans. But and the Americans are probably a little more independent-minded, but it's hard to say because the Russians are pretty independent-minded too. It's hard to say which of us are crazier. We're both pretty crazy. And we both have a moral conviction. YouTube's blocking half your comments. That's interesting. What are you saying that's getting you blocked? Maybe we'll do this on Discord sometime so you can say whatever you want, or we'll stream a naughty conversation on Rumble where we'll say all the bad things. But if you look at it logistically, because all wars come down to logistics, it's the same reason why Russia's going to win in Ukraine. They logistically have everything they need to conduct a war for over a indefinite period of time. And so does America if we were fighting a war in proximity, right? And so regarding World War II, because even if the Nazis had taken Moscow, the Soviets had moved all of their resources east of the Ural Mountains, all their manufacturing, and they could have they could have continued fighting for a very long time, and and without American support, the Germans would have been able to throw all of their resources against the Russians, but they were already throwing most of their resources against the Russians. I don't know the exact numbers, but probably the Russians were probably fighting 3/4 of the German military, while we were only probably fighting about 1/4 of it. That being said, the Germans never had heavy bombers or anything like that, and we could have, as long as we had Britain as our unsinkable aircraft carrier, we could have just continued to burn down and drop the world supply of napalm on Germany until we eventually lit it all on fire and then eventually nuked it in 1945. So we could have. So either of us probably could have won the war, not that it would have been pretty, but we could have, because by the time the Soviets were marching across Europe into Germany, The Germans were basically already done, largely because the Soviets had just ground them down. We were destroying a lot of their infrastructure and their ability to, build new shit. But um, but given time and given the momentum that the Soviets were building up, they would have eventually been able to do the same. I think. Um, and like I said, without the Soviet help, America would never have been able to invade Germany. I don't think, because the only reason we were able to do D-Day and do the invade through Italy is because most of the fascist resources were taken up in Eastern Europe fighting the Soviets. But we would have eventually just nuked them, and that would have put a stop to it. Except a lot more civilians would have died. So that's sort of my belief. I think that both the Americans and the Soviets could have won World War II on their own. It would have just been a lot messier. So no, war is never pretty, and it's not supposed to be pretty. I think was it Robert E. Lee that said it's a good thing that war is so awful because otherwise people might like it too much. So anyway, I'm almost done with my tea. Does anybody else have any other questions or anything you want to talk about? What would not have happened in Europe? Let's see what luxury has to say here. It's interesting that YouTube's banning a lot of his comment. Nukes? I don't know. I mean, maybe we would have just kept on dropping napalm on them. Because so now if the Soviets allowed the Germans to access the natural resources in the Caucasus, then that would have been a whole different ball game. But if we assume that Hitler and Stalin didn't like each other, but they didn't actually fight, then the Germans would have run out of resources, and we could have eventually just burnt them down. All right, so even if we didn't use nukes, I mean, because we killed far more people with napalm than we did with nukes anyway. But I think we could have eventually burnt. We would have eventually bombed Europe into the Stone Age. Um, and and they would have eventually probably starved to death. So it would have been very messy. But we did not have the land army to to fight the Germans the way that the Soviets did, and the Soviets didn't have the air power to bomb them into submission and destroy their resources that we had. So it was actually a really great partnership. I mean, America and Russia are natural strategic allies. If it weren't for our two governments, um, I don't know if we would have used a nuke in Europe or not. I mean, if things weren't going well for us, let's say 1946 came around. Um, I mean, probably what would have happened is we would have nuked Japan, and then we would have said, "Hey, Hitler, you need to chill the fuck out because you're next." Uh, but it would have been catastrophically messy without the Russians and the Soviets helping, or us helping them. Either way, it was a lot better that the two of us teamed up on something like that. But no, I think the Soviets could have won the war on their own. It would have just sucked. Uh, well, that's interesting that YouTube's blocking a lot of your comments. Well, there's our big tech censorship in action. Wow, we've been going for an hour already. That's pretty crazy. Mm. All right, is there anything else anybody wants to talk about? Otherwise, I've got to go call my dad back and call my brother and do a few things before 5 o'clock, and then we'll sink some ships tonight. I'll stream tonight. Uh, Hold on one second. This is the office calling. All right, sorry about that. That was the office calling, and I had to take care of that. Um, yeah, I mean, YouTube is going to censor stuff. I mean, I thought about streaming on Rumble. Uh, I don't know if I want to. I mean, I've got a Rumble channel, which I originally created to post all the spicy stuff, but nothing I say is really that spicy. I mean, I guess common sense is considered naughty these days, but a lot of the stuff I say I think is probably pretty tame. Uh, oh, that's awesome. Pathfinder's good stuff. Uh, I think I liked Third Ed Dungeons and Dragons the best. Third Ed 3.5. Although Second Ed was probably what I did the most when I was younger in college. We did a lot of Second Ed. Third Ed was very cool. Um, the newer stuff. Fourth Ed sucked. Fifth Ed, eh. Fifth Ed they tried to make it more like an MMO on paper, and it just didn't work out very well. Well, one of the convenient things, you're right, I'm sure I would be defunded for everything that I say. Conveniently, I am not monetized, and I don't give a damn what YouTube thinks because I make my money, doing engineering consulting, technology consulting. I have a computer store, and I work on various projects. So this is just purely for fun because I feel like it. And maybe years from now when I'm old, maybe I'll make a living playing video games. I think it'd be awesome to be like 80 years old playing video games for a living on the internet. Um, that would be pretty badass. But no, I don't think I'm too contrarian for YouTube and big tech. I don't think they would appreciate a lot of my opinions. Um, But that being said, I do feel that we need to have honest conversations about things just to avoid all the obvious problems that we get ourselves into that would be easily unavoidable. Um, yeah, it is upsetting that good information is being censored, especially regarding a lot of the war stuff going on, a lot of these conflicts. Um, I think that one of the problems, for example, that Trump's going to get into trying to negotiate with Putin is that he's got bad information. And, I find the idea of Russia losing, having lost like 1 million soldiers, I find that ridiculous. I don't think they've lost that many. Um, although I do think that the Ukrainian casualties have been very high, and the Russian casualties have been high. I mean, the Ukrainians have been doing a very effective job fighting the Russians, although I do think that our military advisors that have been helping Ukraine have probably been doing more harm than good. Um, but it was ridiculous for these two countries to be fighting in the first place. Um, yeah, I've never really heard you say anything too crazy. Everyday luxury. Um, now one of the things that now one of the executive orders that Trump signed, which I don't know how that's going to work or not, is he's told government that they're no longer allowed to ask big tech to censor people. I don't know if that's going to be effective or not because even if they don't ask them in an official capacity, like Zuckerberg admitted that there was a backdoor portal where the FBI could log into Facebook and mark and flag different posts to be censored. A lot of the people working at these big tech companies are true believers in whatever weird ideology that they have. I mean, keep in mind there's a lot of people out there that still think communism's a good idea, or that they think that you can force people into changing against their will. People are going to do what they want to do, and you know, uh, God loves hillbillies because they seem to survive all the crazy shit they do. But you're not going to be able to force people to change. But yeah, most of what I've heard you guys say is not particularly controversial. It's just inconvenient to the political narrative. And a lot of these political narratives are created, I think, so that the donor class and the friends of the politicians can get rich. So, that's kind of inconvenient. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the whole purpose behind free speech is so that American citizens could tell their government, "Hey, we don't like what you're doing." And one of the things that people have to understand about our constitutional rights is that our constitutional rights were not given to us. Okay, the Constitution does not give us our rights. Instead, the Constitution says that we as free people have certain inalienable rights that are given to us by God, and you are not allowed to take them from us. And this is why having a common culture is so important. The American idea is that we as free sovereign people have inalienable rights given to us by God, as free thinking individuals who can determine our own destiny. And we are allowed to do what we want, say what we want, pursue our interests, and defend ourselves. And the government exists to help us protect our rights, not to tell us what we can and cannot do. Um, because, remember that the whole Revolutionary War started because we didn't want to give money to the Brits, and then they tried taking our guns, and so we started killing them. Yeah, the Constitution codified what we already had. Um, well, and this isn't even a conservative opinion. It's an American opinion. Americans are very liberal compared to most of the world. I'll give you an example. So I was in Ukraine in when the hell was I? In 2014. It was the first time I was there. I was there during the end of the Euromaidan, and I was at a jazz concert with a very hot friend of mine, and she was saying some of the most hilariously inappropriate jokes that you could never say here in America for a whole bunch of racial reasons, okay? And she was of a more conservative mindset than, I mean, I'm a relatively traditional guy. I'm Greek Orthodox. I grew up in a very traditional family. But this girl grew up in, as a Russian Orthodox in Ukraine, where they were far more based than we could imagine, right? And then when Poland and Germany started taking in these Ukrainian refugees, they were astonished to find, during the current war, they were astonished to find out just how conservative these people were. Or I'll give you another example. I have a friend from Russia. He lives in London now, and he is the most liberal gay Russian that I know. And he I asked him once, he was living with another guy, and I asked him once. We were hanging out at the airport. I was transferring planes. And I just happened to have a really long layover in the Moscow airport, so he came and hung out with me for a while. And I asked him about his thought on gay marriage, and he said, "That's ridiculous. You can't have gay marriage. Two men can't get married." And this is the most liberal gay Russian that I know. Um, and he is far more conservative than your average Trump voter, right? So the idea that Americans are conservative is kind of ridiculous, Or look at there's an interview. I was watching an interview with this African gentleman, uh, some tribal guy, and he was saying some very based conservative things, all founded in his, his love of nature, and his tribe mainly, hunted. They were very self-sufficient, living off the land, right? And when you are living off the land and having to deal with nature, you do not have the luxury of being liberal. You have to be very, very based and grounded. Yeah, marriage is a procreation contract in many places. Yeah, and so the what changed is that people started here in America. People started saying that things that are common sense and things that are true must be conservative. Well, no, they're just, common sense is common sense. There's a reason that certain things tend to happen because they work. And that's not really a conservative position or a liberal position. And there's also a lot of conflating between liberal and leftism. The people who are trying to push communism and Marxism versus people, the traditional liberals who believe in liberty and freedom, right? America in its inception is a liberal institution because we believe in... Excuse me, hold on just a minute. I'm still a little bit sick. Americans believe in liberty and freedom, which is the word liberal comes from liberty. So, I'm going to have to, hold on, let me mute the microphone. I think I'm just about out of gas for the day. So I might have to wrap this up because I'm starting to feel a little bit rough. So here's what I'm going to do, guys. I'm going to wrap up the stream. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm going to take a hot shower and get all this crap out of my head. I still have a sinus infection. It's just a lot better now. And I'm going to go make a few phone calls. I'm going to go wrap up I'm going to go do a little bit more work. And then, then we'll sink some ships or do something tonight. So, but yeah, I'm going to have to wrap it up because I'm not feeling so hot now. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you do, I'll start doing this format on a regular basis. And thanks, Luxury. I hope I feel better too. I've been so sick. I haven't been this sick in years. And unfortunately, it set me behind really bad in my work too. Ever since Ed died, I'm the only one who can do the really difficult laptop projects. And of course, while I was sick, all the difficult laptop projects came in, and so the guys couldn't really. So I had to handle a lot of the stuff myself. I'm glad. I'm glad you like it, Shadow Wolf. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to, on most days, sometime around noon-ish, give or take, depending on whenever I can take my lunch, we'll just hang out and do just a casual live stream. Sometimes here, maybe I'll do it from my office. Once I'm back in the office, maybe from the car. Although that might be hard if I can't see the comments. Yeah, maybe we'll start a Rumble hangout. So right now we're just taking baby steps. We're just trying this new format, but it looks like you guys like it. So yeah, we'll do it again. I'll be on sometime tonight after I finish work, and I'll probably have to take a nap because I do feel a little bit crappy. And we'll go sink some ships, and or maybe play some big stompy robots. And then I'll try and do one of these hangout live streams on most days around lunchtime. So, all right, I gotta bounce. I'm feeling pretty rough. So I will see everybody later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. I'll see everybody tonight. Goodbye.